The camera drifts through a quiet American town covered in morning mist, pine trees glistening with dew, a faint whistle of wind moving through empty streets. A man in a police uniform steps out of his old patrol truck, his shadow stretching across the snow. Beside him, a loyal German shepherd follows close, eyes alert, heart steady. Inside that same town, a little girl kneels by a shop window, her hands trembling, her eyes filled with a kind of sadness too heavy for her age. What could possibly connect this weary officer, this broken child, and the loyal dog who never gave up? This is the story of how darkness met its match, not through power, but through love. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, and may your day be filled with warmth, peace, and just a little bit of light. Winter had settled hard over the mountain town of Willow Brook, a quiet American valley buried beneath layers of snow and silence. The streets gleamed white beneath gray skies, and breath rose like smoke from the few who dared walk outside. It was the kind of afternoon when the cold seemed to swallow even sound itself, until the faint hum of a patrol car broke through. Officer Ethan Cole, 38, drove slowly down Main Street, the snow crunching under the tires. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his once sandy hair now flecked with gray at the temples. Years on the force had carved faint lines around his blue-gray eyes, the kind of eyes that could be both steel and kindness depending on the day. Ethan carried the weary patience of a man who had seen too much suffering and had learned to live with silence as his companion. His right hand rested on the head of his partner, Rex, a 7-year-old German shepherd with a thick storm-gray coat and alert amber eyes that never stopped scanning. Rex had served alongside Ethan for nearly 5 years, through missing person searches, late-night rescues, and moments that had turned men's hearts to ice. There was a quiet nobility to the dog, a kind of solemn empathy that came from sensing pain before words could form. The heater in the patrol car hummed softly. "Just one more call, boy," Ethan murmured, glancing at the GPS. The dispatch had reported a possible disturbance at Maison Lune, the most expensive boutique in Willowbrook. Not a place where crime happened, but where vanity often did. He sighed, half expecting another false alarm, the kind that rich people triggered when their alarms picked up wind or shadows. Still, duty was duty. When Ethan parked, the first thing he noticed was the glass facade of the store, a temple of luxury gleaming under artificial lights. Through the frosted windows, silhouettes moved like reflections in a dream. He pushed open the door, and a bell chimed softly, delicate as a violin note. Warm air and the faint scent of leather and perfume met him. At first, everything looked normal. An assistant folding scarves near a counter, a manager talking on the phone. Then Rex's ears went up, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Ethan followed his gaze. At the far end of the showroom, a woman stood like a crimson flame against all that white. Vanessa Hart, 41, was tall, statuesque, her auburn hair coiled into a sleek chignon. She wore a red silk dress that clung to her figure like liquid fire, and diamond earrings that caught the light like small stars. She was beautiful in the kind of way that made people uneasy, perfectly polished, perfectly distant. Those who knew her whispered that she had been a model before marrying Mayor Douglas Hart, and that she treated the world as a mirror meant to reflect her power. The years of social climbing had turned her smile sharp and her patience short. Before her, on the polished tile floor, knelt a child. Lily, 6 years old, wore a white cotton dress already crumpled from trembling hands. Her hair, soft brown curls tangled at the ends, fell over her tear-streaked face. She was small for her age, her thin shoulders shaking under the weight of fear. A small cloth lay beside her, soaked and dirty. Vanessa's voice sliced through the silence. "If you can't clean it with the cloth, then use your tongue." Ethan froze. For a second he thought he had misheard. The store clerks were motionless, their eyes averted, their faces pale. Then the sound came, a tiny whimper. My tongue hurts. I can't wipe anymore." The words barely made it through the sobs. Something inside Ethan snapped taut, like a wire pulled too long. He moved forward, his boots clicking against the marble floor. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm but edged with warning. "Step away from the child." Vanessa turned sharply, her expression flickering between irritation and disbelief. Officer, this is a misunderstanding. The girl made a mess. I'm teaching her a lesson. Her tone was clipped, rehearsed, used to being obeyed. Ethan crouched beside Lily, his presence gentle. Hey there, sweetheart. What's your name? She hesitated, then whispered, Lily. It's okay, Lily. You don't have to do that anymore, he said softly. Rex came closer, his head lowering until his nose brushed the girl's arm. She flinched at first, but then stilled, staring into those amber eyes. The dog's warmth seemed to melt a thin layer of the cold away. Vanessa scoffed, crossing her arms. Officer, if you're done playing hero, I'd like you to remove that mutt from my store. Ethan straightened slowly, his height casting a long shadow over the polished floor. That mutt is a decorated K9, ma'am, and from what I see, you're the one who needs to leave. Do you know who I am? She snapped. I'm the mayor's wife. Then I'm sure he'll appreciate hearing what his wife does in her free time, Ethan replied. His tone was controlled, but his jaw tightened. Vanessa's eyes flickered with something like fear before turning to anger. You have no idea what that child is like. Spoiled, disrespectful. She's 6, Ethan interrupted, his voice lowering. The only thing she's spoiled with is cruelty. One of the clerks, a young woman named Mia, timid and soft-spoken, stepped forward. Her hands trembled as she whispered, Sir, there's security footage. Vanessa spun toward her. Don't you dare! Ethan cut in. Ma'am, you'll need to come with me. The store fell silent. The only sound was the slow, rhythmic click of Rex's claws as he stood between the woman and the child. Vanessa tried to compose herself, lifting her chin. This is absurd. So is making a child lick your shoes, Ethan said evenly. He lifted Lily gently into his arms. She tensed, expecting punishment, but when she realized he was holding her securely, not harshly, her small fingers clutched his coat. The scent of leather and cold air clung to him, familiar and safe. As Ethan turned to leave, Rex barked once, short, commanding, as if sealing the moment. Outside, the snow had started falling again, soft flakes catching in the glow of streetlights. Ethan placed Lily in the back seat, wrapping his jacket around her small frame. She looked at him, eyes wide and fragile. Am I in trouble? She asked. No, honey, he said, closing the door gently. You're safe now. Vanessa was still arguing when another officer arrived to escort her. Ethan didn't look back. The engine started, the heater groaning to life. Beside him, Rex watched through the window, ears perked, breath fogging the glass. Good work, partner, Ethan murmured. The drive back to the station was quiet, except for the soft sniffles in the back seat. When they passed the frozen river that cut through Willowbrook, Ethan saw Lily's reflection in the rearview mirror, her small face half lit by the dashboard glow, eyes distant, already retreating into some safe corner inside herself. Rex turned his head, let out a low whine, and placed his paw against the window, as if promising that corner wouldn't be so lonely anymore. By the time they reached the station, the snow had thickened, blanketing everything in white silence. Ethan carried Lily inside, through the dim corridors smelling of coffee and paper. He gave her hot chocolate from the vending machine, and she sipped it carefully, both hands trembling around the cup. Do you have anyone at home, Lily? Any relatives? He asked. She shook her head. Just her, she whispered, and the housekeeper, but she said if I tell, she'll send me away. Ethan's throat tightened. He looked down at Rex, whose amber eyes met his. Looks like we've got some work to do, boy. The dog wagged his tail once, the motion slow and deliberate. Outside, the wind howled against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, a sound both solemn and hopeful. Ethan knew this was just the beginning. He had seen cruelty before, but something about this felt different. It wasn't just a case. It was a wound in the world that demanded healing. And as Rex laid his head across the little girl's lap, she reached out hesitantly, touching the dog's fur for the first time. For one fleeting second, the trembling stopped. The world outside was still cold, but inside that small circle of warmth, a man, a dog, and a child, the first fragile ember of safety began to glow. Morning came reluctantly to Willowbrook, draped in a thin veil of fog. The snow that had fallen the night before still clung to rooftops, and the town's narrow streets glowed pale under the weak winter sun. Inside the police station, Officer Ethan Cole sat at his desk, coat still damp at the shoulders. His report lay unfinished, a few words smudged where his hand had hesitated. Across the room, the murmur of typewriters and ringing phones filled the air, but none of it reached him. His mind kept replaying the same image, Lily's small figure on that cold tile floor, her trembling voice whispering, "My tongue hurts so much." He pressed his fingers against his eyes until light burst behind his lids, sharp and fleeting. "Cole," came a voice from behind him, brisk and heavy with authority. Captain Raymond Burke, a man in his mid-50s, stood by the doorway holding a cup of black coffee. Burke had the kind of presence that filled any room, tall, broad-chested, his thinning silver hair combed neatly, his eyes the color of storm clouds. A veteran of the force for 3 decades, Burke was a man of habit and order, known for his fairness, but also for his reluctance to stir conflict, especially when politics hovered nearby. "Heard about what happened at Maison Lune," he said, stepping closer. "That was one hell of a scene." Ethan nodded quietly. "The girl's safe now." "And the woman?" "Vanessa Hart. She's in holding for now." Burke took a slow sip of coffee, studying him. "You realize who she is, don't you?" Ethan gave a tired half-smile. "Yeah, the mayor's wife. Everyone's reminded me since dawn." Burke sighed. "Look, Cole, you did the right thing, morally, but politically—" He trailed off, his meaning heavy in the air. "We have to tread lightly. The mayor's already called twice." "So the truth depends on who tells it," Ethan said, his tone quiet but edged with steel. Burke didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Between you and me, I've got a kid too. If I'd seen what you did, I'd probably have done worse. But you've got to be smart about this. File your report. Let the department handle the rest. No statements to the press." Ethan looked up, meeting his captain's gaze. "And what happens to Lily?" "Child Services will take her for now. They'll place her somewhere safe until this blows over." "She's terrified," Ethan said. "She doesn't trust anyone. She barely speaks." Burke's face softened, the hard edges of command briefly fading. "Then maybe you should be the one to talk to her. Just stay within protocol." He left the cup on the desk and walked away, his footsteps fading down the hall. Ethan sat still for a moment before glancing toward the small observation room across the corridor. Through the glass window, Lily sat at a metal table too big for her. Her legs dangled above the floor, her small hands wrapped around a mug of cocoa gone cold. She wasn't crying anymore. She just stared blankly at the snow outside. Rex lay nearby, head resting on his paws, eyes half open but alert. The dog refused to leave her side since the night before. Ethan entered quietly. "Morning, kiddo," he said softly. Lily looked up but didn't answer. Her cheeks were pale, her lips dry. "You sleep at all?" A small shake of her head. "Do you remember anyone I can call for you? Family?" Another shake. She whispered, "The housekeeper, maybe. Miss Clara." Her voice cracked on the last word. Ethan nodded. "All right, we'll try her." He stepped outside to make the call. The line rang 6 times before a frail voice answered. "Clara Jennings," she said, her tone wary. "Ma'am, this is Officer Ethan Cole from Willowbrook PD. I have Lily here with me. She mentioned you." There was a sharp intake of breath, then a tremble. "Oh, dear Lord. Is she safe?" "She is. But I need to ask you a few questions about Mrs. Hart." Silence followed, broken only by faint sobbing. "Officer," Clara said at last, her voice quivering with age and fear. "I wanted to speak up before, but every time I did, she threatened to send us both away. That poor child. She's been through things no one should endure. Would you be willing to give a statement? If it helps Lily?" "Yes." Ethan thanked her and hung up. For the first time that morning, something inside him eased, until he turned and saw Deputy Mark Jensen leaning against the doorframe. Mark, 33, was the kind of man who smiled too often for the wrong reasons. Tall and clean-cut, his uniform pressed sharp as a blade, he was ambitious. Too ambitious for a small-town department. "You're really going through with this, huh?" he said. "Word is the mayor's furious. You'll be lucky if you still have a badge by next week. You'd have done the same, Ethan replied. Maybe, Mark said with a smirk, if the cameras were rolling. Ethan's jaw tightened. Watch yourself, Jensen. Relax, Cole. I'm just saying. People in this town remember who feeds them. The mayor's office signs our checks. He gave a mock salute and walked away. That night, Ethan stayed late finishing his report. The official language felt cold, detached, like trying to capture a scream in ink. Rex lay by his feet, occasionally sighing in that low, human way dogs do when they feel the heaviness of a room. When Ethan finally looked up, the clock showed 10:37 p.m. He rubbed his neck, stood, and glanced again at the observation window. Lily was gone. Social services had taken her to a temporary home. The absence hit him harder than he expected, an empty ache that settled somewhere deep in his chest. He gathered his coat and stepped out into the night. The cold bit sharper now, the wind curling through narrow alleys. Snow flurries danced under the streetlights like drifting ash. The drive home was long and silent, the kind that made the world feel hollow. As he turned into his driveway, he noticed something strange. A small figure sitting on his porch steps, knees pulled to her chest, a tattered blanket around her shoulders. Rex barked once, then whined softly. Ethan slammed the brakes, heart lurching. He jumped out of the car. Lily? The girl looked up, her eyes wide and red from crying. I didn't know where else to go, she whispered. They said they'd take me to a new house, but the lady there screamed when I spilled my milk. I ran away. Her lips trembled. I followed the dog's smell. Ethan crouched down, his heart breaking at the sheer instinct that had led her there. You followed Rex's scent? She nodded faintly. He smells safe. Ethan glanced at the dog, who wagged his tail once, solemn and proud. Snowflakes clung to his fur, glowing faintly in the porch light. All right, Ethan said quietly. Let's get you inside. He made her hot soup and wrapped her in a thick flannel blanket. The house was small but warm, filled with the faint scent of pine wood and coffee. On the wall hung old photographs, a young Ethan in uniform, a woman with auburn hair beside him, smiling. Lily pointed at it. Is that your wife? Ethan hesitated. Was, he said simply. She passed away a few years back. She used to say home isn't a place, it's a feeling. Lily's gaze drifted to Rex, who had curled up near the fireplace, tail flicking lazily. Is he always so quiet? Only when he knows someone's scared, Ethan said. He listens better than most people I know. She smiled faintly for the first time. Then maybe he'll listen to me too. Later, when she finally fell asleep on the couch, Ethan stood watching her, the fire casting gold light across her face. Outside, the snow fell soundlessly. He thought of Burke's warning, of politics, of the mayor's threats, but none of it mattered. What mattered was that this child was here, safe for now, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and hope. Rex lifted his head, eyes meeting Ethan's as if to ask a silent question. Ethan exhaled slowly, nodding to himself. We'll figure it out, partner, he murmured. In the quiet that followed, the crackle of the fire was the only sound. The town outside slept beneath its frozen peace, unaware that in one small house at the edge of Willow Brook, a promise had been made, a promise that no report could capture, no order could erase. A man, a dog, and a child, bound not by blood, but by the simple vow of protection. The storm eased by morning, leaving Willowbrook under a pale gray sky and a silence that hung heavy over the rooftops. The kind of cold that bit at the edges of windows crept into bones and lingered there. In the modest house on the edge of town, the faint crackle of a dying fire mixed with the quiet rhythm of breathing, one steady, one fragile. Ethan Cole stood by the kitchen counter, stirring a pot of oatmeal that steamed lazily in the light of dawn. His uniform jacket hung on a chair nearby, the badge dull under the dim glow. His eyes, tired but soft, drifted toward the couch where Lily still slept, curled up beneath a quilt patterned with faded blue stars. Rex lay beside her, head resting on his paws, watching her with protective calm. Every now and then, his ears twitched at the smallest sound, a habit from years of guarding what mattered most. When Lily stirred, she didn't cry, just blinked, quietly scanning the unfamiliar room. Her small hands gripped the blanket tighter, as though holding on to some unseen edge. Ethan turned down the stove and walked over. "Morning," he said gently. "You hungry?" She nodded faintly, voice small. "Can I feed him first?" She pointed toward Rex. "He looks hungrier." Ethan smiled. He'd love that. After breakfast, Ethan called Captain Burke to explain the situation. "She showed up at my house last night," he said, voice low. "Social services lost her." There was a long pause before Burke replied, "Cole, you realize this could get you in trouble. You're not supposed to take her in." "What was I supposed to do? Send her back to the people who made her afraid of shoes?" The captain sighed. "All right, keep her there for now. I'll make a few calls, but you'd better pray this doesn't reach City Hall." When Ethan hung up, Lily was sitting by the window with Rex beside her. Her hand rested on his back, her eyes tracing the slow dance of falling snow. "He's warm," she murmured. "Feels like the sun if it had fur." Ethan smiled faintly. "That's what makes him special." She turned to him. "Does he get scared?" "Sometimes," Ethan said. "But when he does, he doesn't hide. He looks for someone to protect. Makes him forget his own fear." Lily thought for a moment, then whispered, "I wish I could be like that." Later that morning, a soft knock echoed through the front door. Ethan opened it to find Grace Halbrook, a woman in her early 40s, standing on the porch holding a small suitcase. She was from Child Protective Services, a social worker known around town for being both gentle and stubborn. Grace was of medium height, her figure lean and angular from long days on the road. Her brown hair, streaked with silver, framed a face lined not by age but by empathy. She had eyes that seemed to absorb the world, gray-green and deep, the kind of eyes that could disarm even the most defensive hearts. "Officer Cole," she greeted, softly. "Captain Burke called. Mind if I come in?" Ethan nodded. Grace stepped inside, brushing snow from her coat. Her gaze landed on Lily, who sat silently by the fire, her knees drawn to her chest. Grace's expression softened immediately. "Hello, sweetheart," she said gently. "My name's Grace. I help kids find safe homes." Lily didn't respond. She just looked down at Rex, fingers twisting the hem of her blanket. Grace knelt beside her, voice calm. "That's a handsome dog you've got there." Still silence. Grace turned to Ethan. "Has she spoken much?" "Barely," he admitted. "Only when it's about the dog." Grace nodded, as though she'd expected that. "Trauma does that," she said quietly. "Some kids cry. Some stop crying altogether." She rose and joined Ethan in the kitchen. "I've read her file. Her biological mother passed when she was 3. Her father remarried within a year, to Vanessa Hart. Since then, reports of neglect have come and gone, always withdrawn before any follow-up. Money buys silence, officer, but you broke that chain." "And now?" Ethan asked. "Now, the mayor's trying to bury this," Grace said bluntly. "He's already calling in favors, but you have an advantage. Public sympathy. People saw the footage you seized. They just don't know what to do with it yet." Ethan frowned. "I didn't leak anything." "Someone else did," Grace said. "And whoever it was may have just saved her." That afternoon, Ethan took Lily for a short walk through the snow-covered park behind his house. Rex padded beside them, his leash hanging loose, his breath puffing clouds into the air. The park was quiet, except for the distant creak of frozen branches. "This place used to have swings," Ethan said, pointing to an old frame half buried in snow. "I used to bring my niece here before she moved away." Lily looked up. "You have a niece?" "Had," he corrected softly. "She's grown now, probably taller than me." He smiled faintly. "Used to think she'd never stop asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "Everything. Why snow is white, why dogs wag their tails, why grown-ups forget to laugh." Lily looked at Rex, whose tail gave a slow, reassuring wag. For the first time, she smiled. "He still laughs," she said, "only with his tail." When they returned home, Grace was waiting on the porch, coat pulled tight around her. "I just got a call," she said gravely. "Vanessa Hart's lawyer is filing for custody, claiming the incident was fabricated." Ethan's expression hardened. "Of course she is." The mayor's backing her, Grace continued. He wants the girl back under their care until the investigation ends. Ethan stepped forward. Over my dead body. I figured you'd say that, Grace said quietly. So I pulled a few strings. There's a clause under emergency welfare that allows a temporary guardian placement if the child feels safer with a sworn protector. She looked toward Lily. She needs to say it herself, though. Inside, Grace knelt beside Lily again. Sweetheart, she said gently, you remember how I said I help kids find safe homes? You get to choose where you feel safest. It's your voice that decides. Lily looked from Grace to Ethan, then to Rex. The dog tilted his head, ears perked, eyes patient. Can I stay here? She asked finally, voice trembling but clear. Grace smiled softly. Yes, darling, you can. That night, after Grace left, the house felt different. Not bigger, not smaller, but alive somehow. Ethan made grilled cheese sandwiches while Lily sat at the kitchen table, drawing on scrap paper with a pencil she'd found in his desk. When he glanced over her shoulder, he saw she'd drawn a small house with 2 stick figures and a dog. Above it, she'd written, in shaky letters, "No shoes allowed." Ethan smiled quietly. That your house? Our house, she said without looking up. Later, when she went to bed, he tucked her in, turning off the lamp. Rex curled up at her feet, his steady breathing filling the silence. Ethan lingered by the doorway, watching as Lily's eyes slowly closed, her face softening in the amber glow of the nightlight. For the first time since he met her, she looked at peace. Outside, the snow had started again, falling soundlessly, each flake a small promise of renewal. Ethan stood there a long time, until the fire burned low and the cold crept in again. Somewhere in his chest, a strange warmth began to stir, fragile, uncertain, but real. He had seen plenty of darkness in his years as an officer, but tonight, watching that small, sleeping child and the dog who guarded her dreams, he felt something close to faith. The sun rose slowly over Willowbrook, bleeding pale gold into the snow-covered roofs. The town looked peaceful from the outside, but inside the police station, tension hummed like a live wire. The news about the mayor's wife incident had spread beyond the borders of their small community, picked up by local media hungry for scandal. Ethan Cole, sitting at his desk, could feel the weight of every whispered conversation behind closed doors. Papers were stacked in front of him, reports, custody forms, a formal complaint that bore the mayor's signature. The ink was still fresh. Rex sat under the desk, head resting on his paws, eyes half open. The dog had sensed Ethan's unease since dawn, his ears flicking each time a phone rang or a door slammed. Ethan took a slow sip of coffee, its bitterness matching the taste in his mouth. The station smelled of metal and old paper, familiar yet suffocating. He looked up when a figure appeared in the doorway. Captain Burke, his face grave. "Cole, in my office," he said quietly. Ethan followed without a word. Burke's office was lined with faded photos, him shaking hands with past governors, him in uniform beside younger officers long retired. It was the room of a man who had seen the world's edges dull with compromise. Burke sat down heavily, folding his hands. "You're being put on administrative leave," he said, eyes not quite meeting Ethan's. "Effective immediately." Ethan's jaw tensed. "Because I rescued a child?" "Because the mayor claims you acted outside your jurisdiction and interfered in a family matter," Burke replied. "They're calling it misconduct." "She was torturing a kid, Ray." Burke sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I know. You did what any decent man would have done. But this isn't about decency. It's about politics. The mayor's not just fighting to protect his wife. He's fighting to save his seat." Ethan stared at him, a quiet fury flickering beneath his calm. "And what happens to Lily?" "Grace Halbrook's keeping her case under review," Burke said. "She's safe, for now." Ethan's knuckles whitened. "For now isn't good enough." Burke looked up finally, weary eyes meeting his. "Go home, Cole. Take a few days. Let this storm pass." Outside, the hallway was alive with murmurs. Deputy Mark Jensen, always too eager for gossip, leaned against a filing cabinet smirking. "Tough luck, Cole. Guess playing hero doesn't always pay off. Ethan didn't bother responding, but Rex growled low, a sound that silenced the room. Mark raised his hands. Easy, dog. I'm just saying, maybe next time think before you pick a fight with the mayor's family. Ethan stopped just long enough to say, I don't pick fights, Jensen. I finish them. Then he left. When he arrived home, Lily was sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, carefully braiding Rex's fur into tiny loops. She looked up as he entered. You're back early. Yeah, he said, trying to keep his voice light. Captain says I've got some time off. Did you do something bad? She asked. No, he said softly. I did something right. Sometimes people don't like that. She seemed to think about that, then returned to her braiding. I don't like loud people either. Neither does Rex, he said with a faint smile. That evening, Ethan received a call from Grace Halbrook. Her voice was calm but urgent. Ethan, listen carefully. Vanessa Hart filed a petition for emergency custody. If the judge approves, she could take Lily back within 72 hours. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. On what grounds? She claims the video was manipulated and that you coerced the child's testimony. Ethan's pulse thudded. You know that's absurd. Of course I do, Grace said. But this town's politics are dirtier than snowmelt. We'll need to prepare a statement. And there's something else. She hesitated. Someone broke into the evidence locker last night. The video file is missing. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, the air seeming to thin around him. Then they're not just trying to bury the case. They're trying to erase it. Grace's voice softened. Don't lose faith. I've seen cases worse than this turn around. How? Because truth has a way of clawing its way out. You just have to hold on long enough for it to breathe. Later, as the sky darkened, Ethan sat by the fireplace, lost in thought. The orange light flickered across his face, revealing the worry etched deep into the lines around his eyes. Lily sat beside Rex, sketching quietly in a notebook Grace had given her. She was drawing a forest, tall pine trees under a sky of faint gray, and in the middle, a small house with a yellow light glowing from within. Is that us? He asked. She nodded. That's our house. I put light so we don't get lost when it's dark. He smiled faintly. Smart girl. She hesitated. Are we in trouble? Not us, he said, voice steady. Just me. Did I do something wrong? He leaned closer, shaking his head. No, sweetheart. You just reminded some people what wrong looks like. As the night deepened, the phone rang again. This time it was Clara Jennings, the elderly housekeeper who had once cared for Lily. Her voice shook. Officer Cole. They came to my house. 2 men. Said I should forget what I saw. I think they were sent by the mayor. Ethan's tone sharpened. Did they threaten you? No, but they looked like they could. Ethan exhaled slowly. Stay with a friend tonight, Clara. Somewhere safe. After he hung up, he paced the living room, every instinct on alert. Rex followed his movements, ears twitching. Ethan finally stopped at the window, watching snow drift under the porch light. They're scared, he murmured. That means we're closer to the truth than they want us to be. Around midnight, a knock echoed at the door. Ethan's hand went instinctively to his holster before he realized it was Grace again. Her face was pale from the cold, her breath clouding in the air. I couldn't sleep, she said, stepping inside. Thought you might need help. She set a folder on the table, papers neatly arranged inside. I pulled the surveillance backup from a secondary server before the breach. The footage is safe. Relief washed over Ethan's face. You're a miracle. Grace gave a small smile. Just a bureaucrat who doesn't trust bureaucrats. She glanced toward Lily's room. How's she holding up? Better than me, Ethan said honestly. Grace nodded. She's stronger than she looks. Kids like her. They learn early that silence is survival. Her voice softened. You can teach her that silence doesn't have to mean fear. When Grace left, Ethan stood by the door for a while, listening to the wind. He turned to see Rex sitting alert by the hallway, tail flicking slowly. The dog tilted his head, eyes catching the firelight. You think we can keep her safe, boy? Rex gave a soft bark, a low rumble that seemed almost like agreement. Ethan smiled tiredly. Didn't think so, but we'll try. He went to check on Lily one last time. She was fast asleep, her small hand curled around Rex's worn collar tag that she'd tied to a string like a lucky charm. Her face was peaceful, her breathing steady. Outside, the snow fell heavier now, covering tracks and roads alike, a soft white shield over everything broken. Ethan lingered there, watching her, then whispered to the dark, "They'll have to go through me first." And in that small, quiet house at the edge of Willow Brook, a suspended officer, a broken child, and a loyal dog waited for morning, bound by a fragile faith that the truth, like light in snow, would find its way through. The next morning dawned gray and hushed, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Willowbrook's streets were buried under another layer of snow, the power lines bowing slightly from the weight of ice. Inside Ethan Cole's small house, the smell of coffee and wood smoke mingled in the air. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, flipping through pages of legal documents Grace had left the night before. The faint creak of the old house was the only sound until he heard the soft padding of small feet. Lily appeared in the doorway, wrapped in one of Ethan's flannel shirts that nearly swallowed her whole. Her brown hair stuck up in sleep-tousled curls, and in her small hands she carried a cup of warm milk that she'd tried to pour herself. "It spilled a little," she said, eyes dropping. "That's all right," Ethan replied, offering a faint smile. "Everyone makes messes sometimes." She blinked, as though surprised not to be scolded, and then nodded solemnly. Rex sat nearby, his thick coat glinting in the firelight. The German Shepherd was aging, 7 years old now, but he moved with steady purpose. There was a small scar near his right ear, a reminder of a rescue mission gone wrong years ago. Yet his eyes still held that unwavering amber glow, gentle when fixed on Lily, fierce when turned toward anyone else. She leaned down to scratch his head, whispering something only he could hear. Rex wagged his tail once and leaned into her hand, the quiet bond between them deepening wordlessly. After breakfast, Ethan checked his phone. 2 missed calls from Captain Burke and 1 from an unknown number. He ignored them. He had spent years following orders, but this was something he could not compromise. Grace had promised to deliver the video evidence to the state prosecutor in case the local court tried to suppress it. Still, Ethan knew the hearts would not go down quietly. The sound of light tapping drew his attention. Lily stood by the frosted window, tracing shapes with her finger in the condensation. Ethan watched silently as she drew a crooked little house, then added a small stick figure, a taller one, and a dog. Finally, she drew long lines above the house that looked like rays of light. "What's that?" Ethan asked gently. She didn't look away from the glass. "It's our house," she said, "but with light, so it doesn't get dark again." He felt something twist inside him, a mix of pride and sorrow so sharp it almost hurt. "That's beautiful, Lily." She turned to him then, small face serious. "Can we make it real?" He hesitated. "Real how?" "With light," she said simply, "for the other kids who don't have it." Her words stayed with him all day, even while he fixed the leaking pipe under the sink and fielded another cautious call from Burke, who warned that men from City Hall were asking questions. Ethan kept hearing her voice, "with light," that evening, after Lily fell asleep. Beside Rex, he went out into the cold, his breath fogging in the night air. Across the street stood his neighbor, Sarah Whitlock, a retired librarian in her early 60s. She was tall and thin, with silver hair always tied back in a bun and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. Sarah had lived alone since her husband's death 5 years ago, and though she often appeared stern, she had a quiet kindness that revealed itself in small gestures, a loaf of bread left on his porch, a repaired glove returned without a word. When she saw him approach, she opened her door before he could knock. "You look like a man with something heavy on his mind," she said dryly. Ethan gave a weary half-smile. "You could say that. I need your help." "Does it involve the mayor's wife and that poor child everyone's whispering about?" she asked, crossing her arms. "Because if so, you should come inside before the snow tattles on us." Inside her home, books lined every wall, and a pot of soup simmered on the stove, filling the air with warmth. Ethan explained everything: the threats, the missing evidence, Grace's risk, and Lily's fragile peace. Sarah listened silently, her expression unreadable until he finished. "You've always been stubborn, Ethan Cole," she said finally. "Your father was the same way. Remember what happened to him when he crossed people in power? Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't regret standing for what was right. No, she admitted, but it cost him everything. She sighed and stirred her soup absently. You can't save every child in this town. Maybe not, Ethan said, but I can save one. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, I'll make some calls. There are people I know. Quiet people, good hearts, long memories. They don't owe the mayor anything. She paused, a faint smile tugging at her lips. And I've been bored lately. Ethan almost laughed, a sound rare for him these days. Thank you, Sarah. Don't thank me yet, she replied. This town's full of shadows. Just make sure your light doesn't burn you out. When Ethan returned home, the clock had struck midnight. Lily was asleep on the couch, one arm draped over Rex's back. The fire had dimmed to glowing embers, and outside, the snow had begun again. He pulled the blanket over her shoulders and sat quietly nearby, his mind racing. The next morning brought trouble. A black SUV was parked at the edge of the property when Ethan stepped outside. Two men in dark coats waited near the mailbox, their hands in their pockets. The taller one stepped forward. He was in his 40s, clean cut, with slicked hair and a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Officer Cole, he said smoothly. Name's Robert Keene. I'm with the mayor's office. My associate and I just wanted to clear up some confusion about your ongoing involvement in the Hart case. The other man, broader and silent, stood just behind him, scanning the house. Ethan kept his tone even. There's no confusion. The case is under state review. Yes, well, Keene said, still smiling. The mayor would prefer to keep things local, for everyone's sake. He handed Ethan a folded paper. A formal order of compliance. You're to refrain from further contact with the child until custody is determined. Ethan took the paper without looking at it. You tell the mayor I don't take orders from men who think law is a decoration. Keene's smile faltered, just a fraction. Careful, officer. You wouldn't want to make this personal. It already is, Ethan said. Rex, sensing the tension, stepped between them, his low growl vibrating in the cold air. Keene's companion shifted uneasily. Good dog, Keene said mockingly. Loyal. Ethan stepped closer, eyes hard. The kind of loyalty your boss wouldn't recognize if it bit him. The man's smile vanished completely now. We'll be in touch. After they left, Ethan stood for a long moment, staring at the road until the SUV disappeared into the snow. When he went back inside, Lily was sitting by the window again, watching frost crawl across the glass. She looked up. Who were they? No one important, Ethan said, forcing a calm he didn't feel. She tilted her head. They looked mean. That's because they are, he said. But mean people don't get to decide who we are. She nodded, returning her gaze to the window. With her small finger, she drew over the frost again, this time a heart above the little house. Now it has more light, she said softly. Ethan stood behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder. The snow outside was falling heavier now, but inside, under the warmth of the old wood stove, that heart seemed to glow. And though he didn't know how long he could keep her safe, in that moment he believed they could outlast the storm. The following week began under the bruised sky of late winter. Snow still clung to the ground, but sunlight had started to cut through, turning icicles into slow tears along the eaves. Inside Ethan Cole's small house on the edge of Willow Brook, warmth hummed quietly through the old radiator pipes. The place was modest, hand-built by his father decades ago, but lately it had begun to look less like a bachelor's refuge and more like something alive. Paper snowflakes Lily had cut out hung from strings in the living room. A stack of dog toys had somehow found permanent residence under the coffee table. Rex, sprawled across the rug, thumped his tail lazily every few minutes, his fur gleaming gold in the afternoon light. Ethan had spent the morning fixing the light fixture above the kitchen table, muttering to himself as he worked. "You're swearing at it wrong," Sarah Whitlock called through the open back door. She stood outside, wrapped in a long gray coat and a red knitted scarf, holding a basket of bread and canned soup. Her hair was pinned in its usual tight bun, but there was amusement dancing in her green eyes. "I've been supervising home disasters longer than you've been alive, officer," she said with a smirk. Ethan chuckled and waved her in. Good to know someone still thinks I'm worth scolding. Sarah set the basket on the counter. That child eats better when there's color on the plate. Add some carrots next time, and before you ask, yes, I'll stay for tea. She was the sort of woman who never waited for permission to do good. Beneath her sharp humor lay years of loneliness, since her husband's passing, and helping Ethan and Lily had become her quiet way of keeping the ghosts of her own empty house at bay. Lily appeared from the hallway, wearing a wool sweater nearly too big for her and clutching a small notebook. Her cheeks were flushed from the heat. "Miss Sarah," she said shyly, "I drew something for you." She opened the notebook to reveal a sketch, Sarah standing in front of a window with Rex at her feet, light pouring through behind them. "Well," Sarah said softly, touched, "you made me look far too kind." "You are kind," Lily said simply. Ethan smiled over the rim of his mug. "She doesn't lie, Sarah. I checked." The laughter that followed was light and real, filling corners of the house that had forgotten how to hold joy. But the moment didn't last. Around noon, Grace Halbrook arrived, her car tires crunching against the icy gravel. She looked tired, her neat brown hair pulled into a bun that had started to loosen, and her heavy coat dusted with snow. Her eyes, usually calm, were shadowed. "You've seen the news?" she asked as soon as Ethan opened the door. "No," he said cautiously. "Should I have?" Grace stepped inside and handed him her phone. A local broadcast was playing, a polished anchor reading from a script while Vanessa Hart's photo appeared beside her. "Mayor Hart's wife denies allegations of abuse," the reporter said. "She claims the incident was staged by a disgruntled officer seeking attention after his suspension. A statement from City Hall describes the officer as unstable and currently under investigation for misconduct." Ethan's stomach turned. "Unstable? They're building a case against you," Grace said. "The mayor's team leaked doctored footage showing you yelling at Vanessa. They cut out everything before and after. It looks bad, Ethan." Sarah crossed her arms. "That woman could drown a saint and call it charity." Grace sighed. "They're also questioning Lily's credibility. If they convince the judge she's traumatized beyond testimony, she'll lose her voice in court." Ethan looked toward the living room, where Lily was feeding Rex pieces of bread, unaware of the conversation. "So what do we do?" "We fight back," Grace said, her tone firm. "But to do that, we need to remind people what's real. The truth isn't enough. It has to be seen." Later that day, Ethan drove into town with Grace and Lily. Willowbrook's main street was small, brick shops, a frozen fountain, and a diner that smelled of cinnamon and grease. Heads turned as they passed. Some people nodded in quiet support. Others looked away. The rumor mill was already grinding. At the diner, Tom Dillard, the owner, a broad man in his 50s with a white beard and kind eyes, waved them in. "Heard enough nonsense to last a lifetime," he said, setting down 3 steaming mugs of cocoa. "For what it's worth, Cole, most folks don't buy it. We know your record." He glanced at Lily, who was drawing quietly on a napkin. "And we saw that video before they tried to bury it." His wife, Martha, a round woman with laugh lines and a perpetual air of motherly concern, joined in. "My sister works at the courthouse. Says the mayor's been yelling down the phone all morning." Grace smiled faintly. "That's good. Means we're getting to him." When they returned home, snow had begun to fall again. Soft, slow flakes that blurred the world into white silence. Lily stood by the window watching them, her reflection faint in the glass. Ethan joined her, leaning down slightly. "You know," he said, "you could draw something here again. Maybe this time a sun instead of just light." She tilted her head, thinking. "A sun would melt the snow." "Maybe that's the point," he said. "Some things need to melt." She smiled, then pressed her finger to the foggy glass, tracing a wide circle, then smaller rays all around it. The simple gesture felt like a prayer. That night, Ethan stayed up late reviewing Grace's notes. She had arranged for a formal hearing in 2 weeks, hoping to move Lily's custody to him under protective guardianship. The odds were slim, but it was something. As he read, he heard movement, Lily's small footsteps down the hall. She appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Bad dream," she whispered. He motioned her closer. "Come here." She climbed onto the couch beside him, curling up with her head against his shoulder. Rex hopped up next to them, settling protectively at their feet. "What happened?" Ethan asked softly. "I was back in that house," she murmured. "The shoes. They were everywhere. They kept walking, even without people." Her voice trembled. Ethan tightened his arm around her. "You're safe here, Lily. You're not there anymore." She nodded, eyes closing, and within minutes her breathing slowed. He sat there long after she fell asleep, staring into the fire. Outside, the storm thickened, howling against the windows, but inside the house, light pooled golden and steady. Sarah's words came back to him. "Make sure your light doesn't burn you out." He looked at the sleeping child beside him, the faithful dog at his feet, and thought, maybe some lights are meant to burn, even if they hurt. When dawn came, it brought stillness. The world outside was blank and new, untouched by tracks or shadow. Ethan stepped outside with his coffee, the cold biting at his skin. Across the street, Sarah was already shoveling her walkway. She waved her shovel in salute, her breath puffing clouds. Inside, Lily's laughter rang out, soft, unguarded, the sound of a beginning. And in that moment, surrounded by snow and morning light, Ethan realized something had shifted. The house was no longer a shelter. It was becoming a home, a place stitched together by hope, by courage, by a child's simple wish to build a house with light. The morning of the hearing arrived like the calm before a storm, cold, quiet, heavy with unspoken weight. Willowbrook's courthouse sat at the center of town, a square gray building that looked more like a forgotten library than a place where justice lived. The flag out front barely stirred in the wind. Inside, people whispered and shuffled, their breath fogging the chilled air as the old heating system sputtered. Ethan Cole stood near the entrance, his dark navy suit pressed but plain, his eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. Beside him stood Grace Halbrook, her usual calm now sharpened by determination. Her coat was buttoned high, her papers organized neatly in a worn leather folder. She'd tied her hair back with precision, as if control could be armor. "You ready?" she asked quietly. "Doesn't matter," Ethan said. "We're doing it anyway." At his side, Rex sat tall, his fur brushed, his amber eyes alert. The courthouse had given special permission for the K-9 to be present. Grace had argued that he was essential for the child's emotional stability. Truth be told, he was essential for everyone's. When Lily entered, clutching the stuffed bear Ethan had given her, Rex rose immediately, tail wagging once in silent greeting. She wore a simple blue dress and small boots Sarah had found at a thrift store, her hair combed into neat braids. There was still fear in her eyes, but also something steadier beneath it, something Grace had called quiet courage. Sarah Whitlock joined them a moment later, leaning on a wooden cane. She had insisted on attending despite her bad knee. "If the mayor's wife gets to parade around with her diamonds," she'd said, "then I'll show up with something money can't buy. Decency." She wore a wool coat and the same red scarf Lily had drawn her with weeks ago. "You look like trouble," Ethan teased softly. "Always have," Sarah replied. Across the hall, Vanessa Hart arrived, surrounded by lawyers. She was immaculate as ever, her hair pinned in a sleek twist, her face calm but cold, a pearl necklace gleaming against her black dress. Yet beneath the flawless surface there was tension, the faint flicker of her jaw, the twitch of her manicured fingers. The man walking beside her was Leonard Paxton, her attorney, a tall, silver-haired figure with sharp cheekbones and a voice honed for intimidation. He had a reputation across 3 counties, a man who could twist sunlight into shadow with his words. "Let's get this over with," he muttered to Vanessa as they passed. The courtroom itself smelled faintly of polish and paper. Judge Margaret Rowan, a woman in her early 60s with steel-gray hair and a face that seemed carved from resolve, presided over the case. Her eyes were deep-set and assessing, the kind that saw through performance. She had risen through the system by believing that law, when stripped of noise, should serve compassion, but that compassion should be earned. "Let's begin," she said, voice firm but even. Grace opened with composure. "Your Honor, what happened in that boutique was not discipline, it was abuse. We have corroborating testimony, medical evidence, and unaltered footage. Officer Cole acted not as a vigilante, but as a man fulfilling his oath to protect. She paused, then gestured toward Lily, who sat beside Rex. The child has found safety under his care. She's eating, speaking, laughing again. This case isn't just about custody. It's about who gives her the right to keep her childhood. Paxton rose smoothly. Your Honor, opposing counsel paints a sentimental picture. The reality is simpler. My client, Mrs. Hart, is a respected member of this community. This so-called abuse video has already been proven to have gaps. Officer Cole, currently suspended, took it upon himself to remove a child from her legal guardian without warrant or authorization. We're here to correct that overreach. Ethan clenched his jaw. Grace shot him a glance, a silent, don't react. Paxton continued, his tone oily and practiced. Furthermore, Mrs. Hart has filed a complaint citing emotional distress caused by Officer Cole's public accusations. We intend to pursue damages if this circus continues. Judge Rowan raised an eyebrow. Mr. Paxton, this is a custody hearing, not a defamation trial. Stay within the matter at hand. Paxton inclined his head, feigning deference. Of course, Your Honor. Then came the part everyone had dreaded, Lily's testimony. Grace approached her gently, crouching to meet her eye level. Sweetheart, do you remember what happened that day in the store? Lily hesitated, fingers gripping Rex's fur. The courtroom was too big, too bright. Vanessa's gaze pierced her like ice, but Rex let out a low whine, a sound that anchored her. She told me to clean her shoes, Lily said softly. I tried with a cloth, but it wasn't good enough. She said to use my tongue. A ripple of shock passed through the room. Lily looked at her lap. It hurt. I cried. She said crying made me ugly. Vanessa's lawyer stood quickly. Objection, leading the witness. Judge Rowan's gavel struck once. Overruled. Grace nodded encouragingly. And then what happened, Lily? The little girl looked toward Ethan, who gave her the smallest nod. He came in, she whispered. The officer. He stopped her. Her small hand reached for Rex's collar. And he had a dog. The dog didn't bark. He just looked at her. I think she knew then she couldn't hurt me anymore. Grace smiled gently. Thank you, sweetheart. You did very well. When it was Paxton's turn, he leaned on the witness stand, voice honeyed but sharp. Lily, you understand that sometimes grown-ups tell children to do things for their own good, right? She frowned slightly. Like brushing your teeth, cleaning your room? Yes, she said uncertainly. And maybe Mrs. Hart was trying to teach you about responsibility. His tone dripped false kindness. Maybe she just wanted you to apologize? I did apologize, Lily said softly. She didn't listen. Her voice cracked, and tears finally welled. Rex nudged her hand and she pressed her face into his fur. That's enough, Judge Rowan said firmly. The witness may step down. As Lily returned to her seat, Ethan caught Vanessa's expression. Something flickered there, a crack in the marble mask. For just a heartbeat, guilt looked out through the eyes of pride. Grace delivered her closing remarks with quiet force. The measure of character isn't how we treat our equals, but those with no power. Officer Cole did not act out of impulse. He acted because silence was complicity. If this court returns Lily to a home built on fear, we are not protecting family. We are protecting cruelty. When the judge finally spoke, the room held its breath. I have reviewed the evidence, the testimonies, and the conduct of all parties. This court finds sufficient cause to grant temporary custody of the minor, Lily Hart, to Officer Ethan Cole under the supervision of Child Protective Services. The case will remain open pending full investigation. Vanessa gasped, her composure fracturing. You can't do this. I can, Judge Rowan replied coolly. And I have. The gavel struck. For a long second, no one moved. Then Lily turned to Ethan and whispered, Can we go home now? His throat tightened as he smiled faintly. Yeah, kiddo, we can. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon light broke through the clouds, scattering gold across the snow. Sarah hugged Lily tightly, murmuring, Told you the truth shines better than diamonds. Grace joined them, exhaustion and relief mingling in her expression. One battle down, she said. Ethan looked at the child and the dog beside him, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air, and felt something heavy lift from his chest. He knelt beside Lily. "You were brave in there." "I didn't cry till the end," she said proudly. "That's okay," Ethan replied softly. "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is cry." Rex barked once, tail wagging. It was as if he knew what everyone else did, that something had shifted for good. For the first time in months, the house with light wasn't just a dream in a drawing. It was real. The days following the trial brought a fragile calm to Willowbrook, the kind of quiet that felt earned rather than given. Snow still blanketed the streets, but spring was beginning to whisper at the edges of the cold, water running under ice, sparrows returning to the telephone lines, and the faint smell of thawed earth in the morning air. Ethan Cole's home, once filled with tension and silence, now carried the rhythm of a new life. The laughter of a child, the thump of a dog's tail, the creak of old floors under steady footsteps. These small sounds had become its heartbeat. It was a Sunday morning when Ethan found Lily sitting on the rug beside Rex, both of them studying the fire like philosophers. The German shepherd's coat shimmered with gold and gray in the flickering light, and his head rested gently on Lily's knee. The girl's face was calm, though her fingers were busy sketching something in her small notebook. "What you drawing?" Ethan asked, sipping his coffee. "A thank you card," she replied without looking up. "For who?" "The judge," she said matter-of-factly. She looked tired. Maybe no one ever gives her drawings. Ethan chuckled softly. "You might be right about that." Rex barked once, almost in agreement. The sound made Lily giggle, and Ethan couldn't help smiling. It was the kind of morning he had stopped believing he'd ever see. Peaceful, simple, and real. A knock interrupted the quiet. When Ethan opened the door, he found Captain Burke standing there. The older man was tall, heavy-set, with graying hair and eyes that always looked slightly weary, as if they had seen too much and never quite recovered. Burke had been Ethan's commanding officer for nearly a decade. He had a reputation for blunt honesty and a stubborn sense of fairness that often put him at odds with the department's politics. "Mind if I come in?" he asked, voice gravelly. "You already are," Ethan said, stepping aside. Burke took off his hat, nodding toward Lily and Rex. "So this is the famous duo," he said with a small smile. Lily stood politely. "Hello, sir?" Burke looked at Ethan with amusement. "She's more polite than you ever were." "She's had better training," Ethan replied. After a few pleasantries, Burke's expression sobered. "Listen, Cole, the mayor's office isn't done with you. They've been poking around internal affairs, trying to drag up something to use against you. But the department's split. Half of them think you're a hero, half think you're a headache." "And you?" Ethan asked. Burke sighed. "I think you're both." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You did the right thing. But right doesn't always win, son. Keep your head down for now. You've made enemies who don't forgive easy." Ethan nodded, though the warning hung heavy. "I didn't sign up to make friends." "Yeah," Burke said quietly. "Neither did your father. Look how that turned out." There was a long silence. The mention of Ethan's father, also a police officer who died after exposing corruption, brought back memories Ethan had long tried to bury. The same system that had betrayed his father now circled him, but this time he wasn't alone. After Burke left, Ethan stepped outside. The air bit at his face, but the light was bright, almost defiant. Across the yard, Sarah Whitlock was kneeling by the fence, tending to a small patch of flowers that had somehow survived the frost. She was wrapped in her old coat, scarf trailing, her movements slow but deliberate. "You're gardening in February?" Ethan asked, approaching with a grin. "It's called faith, dear," she said without looking up. "You plant early when you believe in spring." She straightened, brushing dirt from her gloves. "You look troubled, the kind of troubled that comes from men with badges." Captain Burke stopped by. "Ah," she said knowingly, "the kind of man who carries his conscience like a rock in his pocket. Heavy, but he won't throw it away." Ethan smiled faintly. "He warned me to stay quiet." "You?" she teased. "Stay quiet?" He chuckled. "I know, I'm not good at that." Sarah's eyes softened. "Neither was your father, but maybe you can do what he never could, win the right way. That night, after putting Lily to bed, Ethan found himself in the small office that had once belonged to his father. The desk was cluttered with old files, a faded photograph of a younger Ethan in uniform beside a proud man with the same eyes. A single drawer refused to open all the way, warped wood, maybe years of neglect. But after some effort, Ethan pried it loose. Inside was a stack of letters bound by twine, their edges yellowed with age. On top lay one addressed to Ethan Cole, "For when you're ready." He hesitated, fingers trembling slightly before unfolding it. The handwriting was unmistakable, strong, slanted, his father's. "Son, if you're reading this, I probably failed to teach you everything I wanted to. The world will tell you that justice is about punishment. It isn't. It's about repair. The hardest part of this job isn't facing evil, it's learning how not to become it. When you meet someone who's been hurt, don't just protect them. Listen. They'll teach you what law books never can." Ethan read it twice, then a third time. The words settled deep in his chest. He placed the letter near the fire, the orange light licking its edges but not yet consuming it. "You got it wrong, Dad," he murmured. "You didn't fail to teach me. I just needed time to understand." Behind him, he heard soft footsteps. Lily stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "You're still awake," she said sleepily. "Yeah," he replied. "Couldn't sleep." She padded over, bare feet silent on the wood floor. "Was that your dad?" It was. "Was he nice?" Ethan smiled faintly. "He was good. That's not the same thing, but it's close." Lily looked at the letter, then the fire. "You miss him?" "Every day." She thought for a moment, then said, "Maybe he's proud, because you helped me like he helped people." He didn't trust himself to speak, so he nodded. Rex stretched, yawning loudly, and lay his head on Ethan's foot. The three of them sat there in silence for a while, the only sound the soft crackle of the fire. Then Lily asked quietly, "Do you think bad people can change?" Ethan looked down at her, surprised. "What made you ask that?" "I had a dream," she said. "The lady who hurt me was cleaning shoes, but not for anyone, just to make them shine again. And she was crying." He exhaled slowly. "I think maybe that's what change looks like, crying while you clean what you broke." She nodded thoughtfully, as if satisfied with that answer, then climbed into his lap and fell asleep. He sat there for a long time, the firelight flickering across the letter and her small, sleeping face. The snow outside had stopped, and the silence felt clean. Ethan finally placed the letter in the drawer again, not as something to forget, but as something to keep. Later, when he carried Lily to bed, he paused by the window. The town lay below, silvered by moonlight, and somewhere in that stillness, he thought he saw his father's shadow in the reflection, smiling, not with pride, but with peace. And in the soft light of that moment, Ethan realized the truth his father had tried to tell him all along. Justice wasn't just in the courts or in the badge. It lived here, in the quiet act of keeping the light alive for someone else. Spring finally came to Willowbrook like a long exhale. The snow melted into glistening streams along the roadside, and the pines that had bowed beneath the frost now stretched upward again, breathing in the returning warmth. The little town was beginning to look alive once more. The bakery reopened with the smell of cinnamon drifting through the air, children's laughter returned to the park, and even the courthouse that had once echoed with conflict stood quiet, as though justice itself was resting. Ethan Cole's home sat at the edge of that awakening, a small wooden house ringed by early blooms. The wind chime Sarah had given them sang faintly on the porch, and Rex dozed under the morning light, his muzzle silvered with age, but his spirit unbroken. Inside, Lily was painting at the kitchen table, her tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth in concentration. Her hair was longer now, tied with a blue ribbon, and her cheeks were rosy from the spring air. She had drawn a new picture, Rex sleeping under a tree, sunlight spilling through branches shaped like hearts. "You think he'll like it?" she asked. "He already does," Ethan said, glancing at Rex. The old shepherd gave a small, approving bark without opening his eyes. Sarah Whitlock arrived a little later, carrying a tray of muffins wrapped in a towel. Her silver hair was loose for once, falling softly against her collar, and her eyes gleamed with amusement as she looked around the house. "You've redecorated," she said. "No more bachelor gloom." Ethan laughed. "You mean I cleaned?" "Same thing," she said. "Men like you think housekeeping's an act of God." She took a seat by the window and watched Lily paint. "That child's got something rare," Sarah said quietly. "She paints the world as if it can still be kind." Ethan nodded. Maybe she's right. That afternoon, Grace Halbrook stopped by. She looked different, less tense, as if the weight of months had finally eased from her shoulders. The sun caught in her chestnut hair as she stepped inside. "I bring good news," she announced, handing Ethan an envelope. "It's official. Full custody's been approved. The court's ruling went through this morning." Ethan stared for a moment before breaking into a rare, unguarded smile. "It's done?" "It's done," Grace confirmed. "You're officially her guardian." Lily, overhearing, leapt from her chair and ran to him. "That means I get to stay forever?" Ethan knelt and hugged her tight. "Forever," he said, voice thick. Rex barked again, tail thumping against the floor, as though sealing the promise himself. The house filled with laughter, the kind that seemed to chase away ghosts. Sarah wiped her eyes discreetly while Grace smiled, watching them. "You know," she said softly, "I've spent years helping families find healing, but I don't think I've ever seen one build it like this, from the ground up." Ethan looked around the room, the drawings on the fridge, the boots by the door, the warmth spilling through every corner. "It wasn't just me," he said. "It was all of us." A few days later, something unexpected arrived in the mail, a small cream-colored envelope with no return address. Ethan opened it carefully. Inside was a short letter written in elegant, slanted handwriting. "I don't ask for forgiveness, because I don't deserve it. But I am trying. I found work at a small shelter out of town, cleaning, serving, listening. Every night I remember the child I failed, and I try to do one thing right for someone else. I hope she is safe. I hope she has light." It was signed simply, VH. Ethan read it twice before setting it down. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he turned toward the window where Lily sat on the porch with Rex, teaching him to balance a treat on his nose. Sarah noticed the letter and asked, "From her?" Ethan nodded. "She's trying." Sarah exhaled slowly. "Maybe that's enough." "Maybe," Ethan said quietly. "Maybe that's where redemption starts." That evening, the neighborhood gathered for a small spring fair at the park. Lanterns hung from the trees, their soft glow reflecting off the newly melted stream that ran beside the field. Ethan drove Lily and Sarah there, with Rex sitting proudly in the back seat. At the park, children darted between food stalls and music floated through the air, a local band playing old country tunes. Grace was there too, helping coordinate the event. She waved when she saw them. "You made it," she called. "Wouldn't miss it," Ethan said. As night fell, the lanterns lit up like fireflies. Lily and a few other children gathered around a small stage where a teacher invited them to draw something they loved most. Ethan watched from a distance as Lily took a blank canvas and began sketching. When she was done, she held it up proudly. It was a house under a bright sun, windows glowing gold, and in the yard stood a man, a little girl, and a dog. Above it, in careful handwriting, she'd written, "The house with no shadows." The crowd clapped, and Grace smiled at Ethan. "That's what she sees when she looks at you," she said softly. "Light, not the darkness you've been through." Ethan's eyes stung, and he swallowed hard. "Guess that's worth all the fights," he murmured. When they returned home, Lily was half asleep in the back seat, her hand resting on Rex's fur. The shepherd was tired too, but his eyes stayed half open, ever watchful. "He never lets his guard down," Sarah said fondly, "even in peace." "That's why we're safe," Ethan replied. Later, after tucking Lily into bed, Ethan stepped outside onto the porch. The air was cool, fragrant with wet grass and pine. Stars dotted the night sky, and the town below glowed faintly, like a constellation brought to earth. Sarah had already gone home, and the house behind him was quiet, except for Rex's slow breathing. Ethan leaned against the railing, holding a mug of coffee gone cold. His gaze fell on the window where Lily's latest drawing hung. The light from inside made the colors come alive, the house, the sun, and the small figures beneath it. He thought of his father's letter again, of the words about justice and repair. Maybe this was what his father meant. Not to win battles, but to mend what's left after them. He whispered into the stillness, "We made it, Dad." The wind stirred softly, and for a moment he imagined he heard a faint, approving reply. Rex padded up beside him and nudged his hand. "Good boy," Ethan said, scratching his ears. The dog leaned into him, eyes half closed in contentment. In that moment, there were no shadows left, only warmth, forgiveness, and the quiet strength of those who had survived together. From the window behind them, the glow of Lily's lamp spilled across the porch, wrapping them both in soft gold. The town was silent except for the distant sound of a church bell marking midnight. A new day was beginning, not one of fear or anger, but one built on light. Ethan turned back toward the door. "Come on, partner," he said. "Let's go home." Rex followed, his tail sweeping against the floorboards. Inside, the fire still burned low in the hearth, steady and bright. And for the first time in a long time, the man, the child, and the dog slept without dreams. In the end, this story reminds us that miracles don't always arrive with thunder or angels' wings. Sometimes God's miracles come quietly, through a kind word, a helping hand, or the courage to forgive. Just like Ethan, Lily, and their faithful dog, we are all asked to carry light into the darkest corners of life. When we choose compassion over anger, when we protect instead of judge, we become part of God's work here on earth. Maybe today, someone near you needs that same kind of light, a smile, a prayer, or simply the comfort of knowing they are not alone. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need hope. Leave a comment below, tell us where you're watching from, and write Amen if you believe that God still works his quiet miracles through love. May God bless you and your family with peace, strength, and endless light. And don't forget to subscribe, because every story we share is another small reminder that faith, kindness, and courage still change the world. Amen.